no, I'll kick off and I'll just explain a little bit because when I talk about incorporation, I don't just mean the legalities of setting up a legal entity with Companies House. It's a bit broader topic because as with business plan, as with investment, they're all linked. So getting a bit of a broader context is quite important. This is generally a huge, huge topic and all sections are independent. So I'm going to skim the. If you need me to go deeper, I can stop and go a bit deeper down. If we have to go offline, then we'll do it. But hopefully, a good overview of all the areas of interest. Interaction. Now, as I'm talking, I do tend to talk a lot. So just if you want to butt in, just stop me and butt in. And the picture you can see on the screens to the right there is this is the business I set up over in all places Palm Beach. And that's the team that I set it up with. So you've got the founder back left and his son next to him. On the right hand side of the table, you've got the state and federal government officials, I think, having a lunch with us out in the sunshine. So there are some positive bits to work in the line as I work in. What I do is I work with investors. So I work with family offices, with venture capitalists, with a bit of crowdfunding work, and so on. And I also work with startups and SMEs. And what I do is I help them to prepare for investments. I just had the good news today. One of my clients, but up in Melbourne, who basically writes some very sophisticated code generation software, just had a successful meeting with local government for a grant for their the next £500,000 of funding. So. Wow. It's an I to prepare the independent assessment of their project for government to review. So we got that through just today. So next few months they'll be completing their paperwork and launching properly. So it's a variety of areas I work in, both with clients and with investors. And what I do is I help investors to understand target companies that are really interesting. And what I'm looking for is, companies tend to broadly categorize when you go through the process of, they're either sort of very well presented and or they're not well presented. And if they're not well presented, they can still be a brilliant project, but just badly put together in terms of how they articulate to an investor. And I've seen some stunningly awful businesses that have a very glossy presentation. One I worked with recently got a $500,000 investment through crowdfunding, and behind the glossy presentation deck there's not a lot, and they've had about 6-7 months of working on the project, and there is a bit of a diamond in there, but they've got a huge mountain to climb, because whereas a crowdfunding platform you're putting your 10, 20, 30 pound in each, your level of rigor you apply is quite low. You look at the glossy slides and you get quite captivated by the project. A venture capitalist will just focus on the numbers. They'll look at your market analysis, they'll look at your financial forecasts, and they're quite brutal. And so if you haven't got information to hand, you can struggle. So what I'm going to talk through, if I get my screen a bit better up, is the business plan part of incorporated, because again, I had a session this morning on this, and I went to town a little bit on the importance of business plan. And there's a little bit of overlap in this session that goes through some of the reasons for its importance in the incorporation of business. And it is important before you get to the incorporation point, you've done some groundwork here. The bit that I touched on this morning, but I'm a bit more focused on today, is the team and the setup. And we talked about one-man band a bit earlier. I think it was Jeff mentioned that being a one-man band. And you have to sit down and say to yourself, what do I have to do and what can't I do, and be quite brutal about it. And the bits you can't do, you've got to find people that can work with you to deliver those chunks of the business. Incorporation is quite a mechanical process in the UK. It's quite fast. If you go to other countries, it varies. And the States are a little bit more involved. Go to Luxembourg, and it's an onerous process to get a company incorporated. In the UK, you can do it in about 15 minutes online through Companies House and through other platforms. It's quite straightforward, but there are options you can look at. People tend to launch into an incorporation and then think about the presence afterwards, and you've got to think ahead, hence the planning bit, and think, well, what do I need to do to take my company out to its fullest extent, and how will I affect little things like how I name it and how I structure it. Funding, you have to be mindful of how you're going to fund those first months or possibly a year or so of your project before you get investment into it, and the switch points. And alongside doing everything else in the business, you have to be a marketing expert. And this is one of those unfortunate or fortunate bits that you can't get away from. You can't outsource this. And if you talk to marketing companies, you'll get a variety of very high quotes for doing some polishing. You need to have a diamond to polish, not a turd. So bear in mind, you have to work that project yourself up front. And the last bit I'm going to check at the end of the session, we've all got our heads around, and I've actually completed it successfully, is you have to prepare for pretty much anything, because as we're facing now, a pandemic with a whole different backdrop of the business around us, anything can happen, and you need to be prepared for not be caught up by those surprises. Oops. Now, for every successful business with a really well thought out plan, this is a bit of overlap from this morning's session, I'll recap on it. You can find somebody who can say to you, I've got a project that didn't need a plan at all. And they will demonstrate their success in running a project. And these do exist, and there's quite a few projects that stood around that do have a good run of it. But the harsh reality is, you do the stats on this, and over in Oregon, they did a bit of work with Palo Alto, and they looked at 1,000 businesses that had a plan, and 1,500 that didn't have a plan. And no surprises, twice as many that had a plan got the loan, got the investment capital, and a third more grew their business. So rather than argue the case for doing that upfront work, the stats demonstrate it clearly. And I tend to use this with my clients quite consistently to say, you might not be happy doing the planning work, but if you want to increase the chance of success, it just makes sense. Okay. Now, you start with yourself. If you're a one-man band in the business, you may have a partner and other people with you. And you have to think really about how you're going to break all the work up. Having planned the business out, so you've tested that the thing actually makes sense, it's got legs in it, you then have to look at what resources you have around you. Now, having talked about the reasons companies don't succeed, on the top right, you've got a little chart here which shows the top 20 reasons why companies fail. And the top one, no surprise, no market need. And it's surprising how many businesses kick off with an ambitious plan, but don't really consider, does anyone want it? Is there a market for it? Are the competitors out there? And this is where the planning bit is quite important. Run out of cash, not the right team, that competitors, these are all things you can plan for. And the team bit in third place is quite critical, because certainly when I started off in the investment market working with private equity firms doing assessment of companies for investment, and it used to be a 12, 14, 16-week exercise, very well paid, but quite soul destroyed, because you're producing a banking report that has red, amber, green flags to get investment from the bank released. And I then moved to venture capital, and then went to family offices, and the timeframes went down from 12 to 16 weeks down to about 4 to 5 days, in one case 24 hours, to assess a business. And what I came to the conclusion is, key point to start with when you have a quick look at the market analysis is the team that's running the business. And 9 times out of 10, if the team isn't strong, even with a good product or service, it'll fail. And you have to be quite clinical about this. So it's important that you have people around you that can help you either in a full-time or part-time capacity, or if they're just basically friends and family, can help you with initial bits of work around perhaps accounting, etc. And a bit of a plug for Laura, I guess, here is that we all think we're good at everything, and I can do a bit of finance, I can do a bit of marketing, a bit of sales, I can do a lot of work around services and so on, and automation. But I'm not a specialist in those areas. And when it comes to recruitment, equally, I've worked in recruitment for a number of years, and I've got some skills in there, but my skills probably pale beside Laura's in terms of relevance and up to date in the market. So think about using a recruiter. Yeah. And there's an adage in recruit, which is hire slow, fire fast, which means take your time and think about what kind of skills your project needs, and the chemistry that person is going to sort of have that's going to fit in with you. Because if you do hire fast, considering those aspects, you'll be firing fast. If you sort of do take your time to get the right people in place, it will grow the business. You need to have people that work with you that can work as a team. They're friendly, they're evangelical and they're fun to work with, but they have to work independently. So you may have friends and family that are keen to work with in the business. When you set it up, you have to be very careful that they are able to deliver independently the work you need, not necessarily just having fun playing table tennis or bar football, whatever. Don't lose sight of the competition, and you have to understand your team in terms of their key levers for driving performance, etc. The structure of the project, people tend to very flat structure when they first start businesses off, and this is all well and good, but you need to think about how you're organised, who does what, how you report to each other. And that structure has to be fluid so it can evolve. And you have to think about day one, when it could be just sort of a Jeff on his own with 1,000 things to do, juggling every task on the planet, and day, sort of 50 or 100, where you've got Jeff plus 3 or 4 other people that work with him, and how you organize that work. And you have to, in some cases, let go of tasks that perhaps you quite like doing, but you aren't that good at doing. Other people can do much more effectively at you. And understand that structure over time will develop and change into a more evolved model. The incorporation bit itself, everyone pretty much starts up with limited companies, but there are a variety of, in fact, there are 8 types of business you can set up in the UK currently. There's bizarrely an unlimited sort of a liability company, which is one of the one words we go for, which is a limited company, as you're probably familiar, protects you from liability within reason, as long as you're operating at a reasonable level within legislation. So as long as you have a decent name for it, it's got lots of articles that define what the company does, how it's structured, how the shares work, etc. It has an office and directors and statement of capital, etc. Control. You can set a company up with Companies House, and once you've incorporated, and assuming you're a limited company, what he wants to do, which gives you some protections, you'll get, having set the company up with Companies House within about a few weeks, HMRC will issue their unique taxpayer reference number to you. And within 3 months of trading, you should have established your corporation tax regime with the Inland Revenue as well. So that's, I could have done the slide presentation with this one slide and said incorporation done. It's not that easy. You should really go a bit further in terms of think about the banking arrangements before you start incorporating a company. So look at sort of the way you want to bank with, look at the options available. And at the moment, bizarrely, there are some very interesting banking options available to you despite the economy. And to do the banking bit, you'll need to have a company incorporation certificate, proof of ID, etc. You can run it off your own personal bank account. I wouldn't advise it, because when you sift through for the accounts and preparation for your returns, it's a bloody mess, and it's hard to demonstrate that funds that you've got coming in weren't for the company, that should count against your profits. There may be a personal sort of funds you put in yourself. So have your own bank account set up. It'll take a few weeks for the banks to finish their DD exercise and check the company's house and registered business running. Then you'll get your debit card and you'll be able to hopefully online bank with them. Now, a lot of people I talk to who run companies are very reluctant to look at an accountant, which is a bit of a shame because you can do a lot of the accounting yourself. We can automate it pretty early. But maybe one of the things you don't want to spend all your hard-earned time doing is sitting down and going through numbers every sort of a month, quarter, and year. So I would suggest at least for the first year, you find a nice, friendly accountant, and I would recommend someone local. Go through recommendation from business peers in the marketplace. And interview them, meet 3 or 4 and sit down, because accountants range from, sort of the chap in the picture in the top left, sort of sat at a desk, scribing away, giving you limited advice and guidance, and people that are quite sharp. So do your own exercise and have a look around and find a good sort of accountant for you. What I'd recommend you start with is the company end of year returns, the payroll side, just in terms of advising you what the payroll amount should be. You can do the processing yourself and use some advice and guidance. Now, if you go to an accountant and you're quite exotic and you say, I'd like to offshore, most accountants will probably sort of throw a wobbly and say you shouldn't be doing that because you can't realise the money without paying tax on it. That's quite correct, but a smart FD will say to you, well, if that offshore entity pays for products directly, you're getting a tax benefit. But again, it's a complicated process. So bear in mind, accountants are there to guide you to the rule book, and an FD, if you have one, should be there to show you the line you can draw. That's a bit outside of the standard accounting practice, but it's still legal. Have a look at systems that are available on the market. There's quite a few of them now. I mean, you've got QuickBooks, Sage, and Xero, and I'd recommend that you put a structure in place and automation as fast as you can. It will save you tons of time. It'll allow you to integrate your banking with your accounting systems, generate a template for your accountant to go away and tidy up and check. It's worth the investment up front to put this in place before you scale. When you start to scale, it's a mountain of work to do. When you're a one-man band or two or three, it's far, far easier. Okay, online presence. Now, this is the bit that it's quite important, because before you commit yourself to incorporate a business and look at your name, etc., you need to have a look a bit broader around the marketplace. Now, there's a whole global community around you. 190 million companies in the world and 260 million registered domain names already. That makes it very difficult to find a decent name. So if you incorporate with what you think is a fantastic name, you might find that there's no domain that reflects that incorporated name you've decided on. Equally, you need to have a look at other social media platforms to make sure your name is on those as well. Now, by way of a lesson, my own company, Correlate, when I first set it up, I didn't really think about Twitter. By the time I set it up, I found that some person camped on the Twitter handle. It took 5 years to have it released, because Twitter no longer released dormant accounts. At some point, they'll randomly release them, so you've got to constantly monitor every day so that name's been released. So in terms of the naming bit, I mean, keep it short, memorable, because whatever your company name is, you want to have it as close as possible to your online presence. Now, there's some tips around things like .com, etc., because people say you can use a variety of other suffixes, which is quite correct, like the .websites, .co's, and .biz. They can be filtered to spam by some systems, so be very mindful of not having a .com. And if you have a .co.uk and you're looking to go international, there is a degree of pushback in some countries for country-based domain suffixes like .co.uk's, .us, etc. So you want to have a look at a generic domain, unless you're going to be working just across the UK marketplace. And bear in mind that you've got 7.8. Well, I think it was this one was 7.4 or 5, but the actual number this year is 7.8 billion, and the internet currently reaches 4.38 of that, which is about 57%. You want a potential slice of that if you're an online business, or you can ship out to clients. So think about the name. And in terms of some warning stories about naming, you have to think globally if you're going to go globally about the name you choose. The reason I mention this is because I work with a family office, and they set a company up which was investing in a Premiership football team. And they had a name for the company, and they had a pile of corporate outfits the team created. And within about 24 hours, the team receiving their kit, one of the players realized that the name translated into a very rude, self-pleasuring phrase in Romanian. Oh. Which when published, I think it was the Sun paper ran it for a few weeks as well. So you've got to be careful about naming businesses. Look around and think, well, if it's a fanciful, which is a constructed name, which is basically you may have a composite of different words put together to form a brand new expression, check that it does translate into various countries. Do some basic sort of checking of, you can go on Google, you can do sort of translate, just check your name makes sense. Okay, and do reserve, and all the possible social media sites you can reserve. So at least have Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. There's a little site called namecheck.com, which you can put your name in. It'll go and just check that those sites had that name available for you. Now, the reason why this is important is because, say, for example, you don't really want to commit to an internet domain up front, and you leave it. You could have bought a domain for about 15, 20 pence in some sites these days. Well, no, so a bit more, about 10, 20 pounds. But if you don't and somebody grabs it, that can be costly. And the average cost of acquiring a domain that's been purchased by somebody else has been resold between 5 and 80,000. so don't miss it. And in some cases, some businesses that have run for a while have got quite a good profile, they can find themselves paying a significant, sort of six-figure sum to acquire the domain name. So take all the assets you can up front. If you've got a name with a .com, take the .co.uk, take the .org. It'll be a few hundred quid over a year to pay with license for them, but it stops people grabbing those alternates and causing confusion for your business. I'll get done to the right hand side. Whoops. All right, now in terms of you've got the company incorporated, you've got the bank on board with you, you've got to run it at some shape or form as an incorporated business, and most companies do this through friends and family and bootstrapping, it's called generally, or pre-seed funding. And mentioned this morning as well, that process of running a business off your own funds or somebody else's, your family or friend, should only take you as far as the inflection point, which is when you go from freemium to premium, or when you go from you've got a prototype completed. At that point, you want to be presenting for investment, and that whole mindset of take away from bootstrapping means that you don't have to satisfy just yourself in terms of rigor and business sense. You've got somebody out there who's a savvy investor who will run a close scrutiny across your business plan, and they'll make sure that what you have makes sense. You're going to be very careful about carefully presenting your business. All the market analysis is up to scratch, your reporting is up to scratch, your financial model makes sense, and that kind of gives you a better chance of success. It means you're more rigorous around milestones and reporting. And the kind of people you're going to go into this kind of a funding model, when you get to, going to be the accelerators. Now these are quite unique, and I'll go to those in a later session around how they work in the UK and also globally. Angels, so these angels, the term actually came from Broadway productions in the US many years ago, when angels used to fund the productions, hence the term. VCs are a recent thing. They originated just after the Second World War, derived from private equity. And some banks, the British bank now has replaced what used to be the main UK lending for businesses, and some tech corporations also give funding to businesses. Okay, I said that marketing expertise, and if there's any marketing people on the sessions or distributors on this content, will probably flame me alive on this because it ruins their income. But there's no excuse for not spending time to sit down and look at the business. And one of the reasons you need to do is because when you classify your business on the industrial classification codes, you need to know where you sit in that market. You need to understand where your business is selling to who, and how your product will sell, who your competitors are, how you'll compete, and to make customers aware of your products and services, how to measure that reach. So you have to get your head around how a marketing person would think in terms of your business. How your sales team be supported by marketing collateral? How do you highlight your USPs? Now, if you do all this work and get your head around how the business and the products and services are promoted to customers, you can then go to a marketing person. And it comes back to the old thing about, if you don't do it, there's a risk you're polishing a turd. If you do it, hopefully you're polishing a diamond, which is a lot more effective. And a marketing company will take your money off you and give you a nice bit of branding based on what you currently have. They can't dig below the covers and see what's actually in your marketing analysis plan, etc. So don't try to abdicate responsibility by allowing a marketing consultant or a marketing company to try and take away your business. You can even have a go at some of the branding elements at the first point of contact. You can have a look at how you want to look at color palettes and the rest, and then you can ask someone to help you in terms of guiding how to present that more effectively. But do the groundwork yourself. Now, the bit that I was going to sort of focus quite a bit on here in this slide, just put a key bit, is you have to prepare for pretty much anything. Launching a startup is not easy. It's stressful, it's painful, and on the far right, a little chart, you can see the whole chart, the version of the part of it this morning. But job pressures, money, health, relationship, all these factors cause stress. And for a startup business, you're going to face all of these. So the more work you do in incorporating a business correctly and comprehensively, the better you're going to be in the longer term. And we know it's not going to be a smooth sailing. The graph, the business cycle bit, people see the blue line as being how a startup works. It's not. Most companies, they'll go to a peak of success and you'll suddenly drop into a trough of despair, and you'll climb out into another peak of success, and you'll think you've made it. Nope, you go back into a recessionary line and you become another trough of despair afterwards. And but the general trajectory you're traveling is hopefully up that blue line on average. But you're going to have staff cuts, you're going to have recruitment drives, you're going to have assessment failures. So be mindful of this. Now, if you do spend time doing the planning, business planning for the project, to set the company up correctly, and you're sensible about the fact that you're going to be facing pretty much anything as you go through this cycle, it's much easier to take a step back. And the little grey box at the bottom is you have to take a step back regularly and get some context. Now, I guess this pandemic's been helpful for me as well in this respect, but you have potentially, sort of a family. You might have a wife or a husband, children. You have a part of your life as well. You have your life once, so keep the context there and don't let it swamp you. And if you don't plan, everything that hits you is a priority and important. You have to separate those things that really are high priority and perhaps their urgency may be high to low, and categorize. If you plan, that's much better. And if worse really does come to worse when you're doing your business, and you collapse in a heap, you've perhaps had investors' money in the project. It's far more painful if it's friends and family, but as an investor, surprise, investors assume to a degree you're going to fail. If you look at a VC's model of probabilities, there are about 6 or 7 different categories they look at in probability. They've got about 80% probability of success in each of those categories. If one drops to, say, 50%, then it takes the whole model down to about 17% success on a project they're investing in. So they kind of expect out of 5 businesses that they run, that 4 are going to go a little bit pear-shaped and one's going to be very successful. So when things don't go well, their biggest concern, surprise, is at you as an entrepreneur, as a founder. How are you coping with that? Because they view people that have been through this process once as being valuable. You've experienced suddenly business up, it's been through a bad cycle. They're more concerned about you coming out that cycle fast onto the next cycle, because it's a numbers game. If you have 2, 3, or 4 failures, the chances are that your next project you learn lessons and be successful. Now, I guess one important bit there that I can highlight is that James Dyson, a very well-known UK inventor, spent 15 years, his whole life savings, and he had a staggering 5,126 failed prototypes. Now, interestingly, his wife actually put a lot of investment into the business, so there's no family stress there. Before it finally succeeded. So it was a long 15 years of grueling work. It wasn't an overnight success, Dyson. And now it's worth 4.9 billion and has private jets and a couple of homes around the world. So you see the outcome, which is a very successful entrepreneur, but the story behind it, like an iceberg, below the surface, is a hell of a lot of failure. And you have to be robust and resilient. In the same way that when you're going for funding, it's surprising that we're talking sales about 7 to 8 contact points to close a sale. That's been a typical pattern. That good sales guys just stick with it until they close. There could be a lot of pushbacks, and that the majority of salespeople drop after the 3rd or 4th contact point. The majority miss the sale. With investment, it's a similar story. The staggering stats are that for VC applications in, say, the States of the UK, you could do 58 of these, and you might get only a couple that actually give you any airtime. The majority of investors don't go that far. The ones that do tune, develop, and they get hardened, and they get a better presentation, they get to a closure on it. So it's a game of stamina and just by staying the course. So the depressing bit is that you have to accept a large degree of failure before you have success, and it's going to be a grotty ride of peaks and troughs and stress. If you plan, you can manage on the peaks and troughs, and you have to be quite brutal. You're going to be losing staff potentially. That could be friends, they could be sort of a family. You might have to cut back costs quite dramatically. At the moment, we're going through this pandemic with companies. I chatted to one guy yesterday who worked for an SME in London, and the poor buggers have been furloughed, made redundant, and sacked all in the same week. So it's a horrendous backdrop for people, and the poor business owners have to go through this horrendous process of how do I keep my company alive for the next what possibly we're talking about between sort of 12 and 18 months, because we're going to have a long period of this managed sort of way of life by the government. So we have to be very careful about, are we robust enough to cope with setting a company up and stresses involved in it, and the fact that it's not just a case of going to company's house and putting some paperwork in and having a bank account set up. Okay. Now, what I said I'd do is I would try to cover off in a very broad way how the business plan is important in setting up, incorporating a company, the importance of the team, and the team could be a team of one, like, so it could be, sort of Jeff could have a team of one doing everything around the clock. And incorporating is the relatively easy bit of filling some paperwork in online and you have companies set up. Knowing that there's a bigger world outside there, which your company is part of. So looking at the online presence around you, checking that names all make sense, that your markets are available, and you can look at sort of how you reach them. And the options around the grotty reality of getting funding is not an easy project, and if it's friends and family, it can be quite a difficult situation if you do fail and the money goes down the pan. The switch points of not funding it until you sort of funding it until you get to an inflection point, which is the point where you need to get funding in, or you start to get a revenue to scale. And the need to be a marketing expert, the biggest branding PR expert sort of around your own business, and to prepare for absolutely anything that could trip you up. So hopefully I've covered those points off. And what I will say is I think I've caught the conversation at the very start of this thing, in that, I learn every day. I work with different businesses, and I meet a variety of characters, and I learn something new every day. And I'm going to learn probably something new from this session again. All I try to do is to share what I do know, and hopefully I get some more stuff back that helps me develop even further. But if equally you do a business that's either about to launch or it's up and running, and you do need more support, then reach out, because these sessions are quite good for making a network of contacts. Use those networks. I was on a conference call day before yesterday with somebody in Switzerland, somebody in Germany, somebody in Italy, someone in New York, in Ireland, and the UK, comparing and contrasting what we're going through. The poor guy in Italy couldn't even leave his apartment. He's basically stuck in the apartment. And it's each country has their own. I mean, Germany is quite relaxed in terms of the sort of level of control they have. They've got a much lower rate of infection over there compared to other countries. But it teaches you that there's a big network of people you can touch and reach out to. So, do you have any questions you want to ask, and do you want to share anything back that you think I can learn from as well?
Well, that was great. Thank you, Anthony.